First tip, put yourself in a good mood. It's super helpful for, obviously putting the audience in a good mood because they can mirror those emotions. And it's easier for you to project a good mood if you're actually feeling it. And so put yourself in that state. And I understand that it can be difficult to be comfortable on stage, let alone be in a good mood. But as you practice comedy more, the comfort will become easier. And then you can shoot for that other goal of being in a good mood. And you may want to shoot for that goal even before you're comfortable on stage, because trying to be in a good mood may land you in the comfort zone more easily than shooting just to be comfortable. Try slowing down. Sometimes we can talk too fast for the audience to fully appreciate or even pick up on the fact that a joke has happened. And sometimes we accidentally step on the laugh. We just move on to the next thing. And sometimes the audience would like to laugh, but they don't. Like, they get the joke, but they don't laugh because they don't want to interrupt the comedian who is continuing to talk. And so slowing down can be a useful thing for your delivery. Or you might try speeding up. Sometimes going too slow implies too much of an expectation from the audience. Like, if we stop after every line, then the audience starts to think, like, am I supposed to laugh here? And sometimes if the jokes are a little bit simple, then going slow in addition to that may imply too much of a weight on what you're saying. Like, it's not worth all of that time that it takes. And so going a little bit faster might be useful too. Don't suppress your idiosyncrasies. In a lot of areas of life, those idiosyncrasies might make you stand out in a way that you don't want to. But in stand-up comedy, those things that make you unique, those idiosyncrasies, are very valuable. And so cherish those. Be proud of those. Use those to your advantage in your delivery. Next tip, avoid crutch words. This can be kind of a difficult one because crutch words are the words that come up when we are searching for the next thing that we want to say. And so while our brain is searching for the next thing, we're not noticing those words that come up in the meantime, those crutch words. And crutch words are not the worst thing in the world. You can absolutely still kill if you use a lot of crutch words, but they are little points in the opposite direction of that goal of killing. And so it is useful to minimize those as much as you can. And here are some tips for minimizing those crutch words. First, record your sets, go over your sets afterwards. That will help you identify those crutch words that you might have missed in the meantime, those ums, those uhs, likes, etc. And then once you have identified those, it will be a lot easier in the moment while you're on stage to catch yourself saying those things. And so when you notice on stage, after having identified them previously, that you're saying like a lot, just go like, oh, I shouldn't do that anymore. In your brain. Don't say that out loud to the audience unless it is fun and funny. But, you'll choose if you want to mention the crutch. Actually, you know what? Here's the tip. Don't mention that you're using crutch words to the audience, because if you continue to use those crutch words, the audience will notice it every time, and they're not going to like that. So, yeah. If the audience doesn't notice the crutch words, then it's probably not a big deal. But if they notice one time that you use crutch words, they will notice it every time afterwards. They'll be keeping track in their brains. So yeah, avoid those crutch words when you can. A few more tips for avoiding crutch words. So try slowing down. When we use those crutch words, often it's because we are talking faster than our brains are keeping up. So our brains are thinking, like, what comes next? What's the next word, sentence, or whatever that I'm about to say? And in the meantime, we're saying, Memorize your lines really well, because if you do, you won't feel the urge as much to use those crutch words. you're not going to be searching your brain for what the next line is and therefore creating an opportunity for those crutch words because you'll know what your next line is. And finally, get comfortable with silence. You won't feel the need to fill the space with crutch words if you're okay with silence. It's fine to think about what the next line is going to be. You can totally take a second or a couple of seconds. You don't need to fill that one beat with an It's okay to just think. It actually feels more confident to the audience. So if you feel the urge to use a crutch word, silence might be a good option instead. Next, I want to give you some tips for sounding unmemorized. It's super useful to sound like this is a conversation that you're having with the audience. And the reason is, I think, obvious. Like, if it sounds like a conversation, the audience is more likely to laugh because that's their part of the conversation. But there is a pull against that in the process of creating comedy. We do iteration so that we can get these jokes better and better and better and better, but at the same time, we're repeating this stuff so that it naturally becomes less natural sounding. We've said it so many times. But you want both. You want those great jokes and you want it to sound unmemorized. So here are some tips about how you can get both at the same time. Make a mental picture of what you're saying. If you're telling a story, then picture those things in your brain. If you're telling a one-liner, picture those things in your brain. That puts you in that space, and that makes it feel more alive to you, and the audience will understand that enlivened quality that you have added to it, and it makes it feel a lot less memorized as a result. Say your lines with a slightly different inflection each time you do it. Different emphasis, different decibel levels. Just change up little pieces of the delivery, and that can help it feel a little more different than the last time you said it or the time before that. You might also try to change out some of the words here and there. Maybe some of the ones that aren't super precise. Sometimes you need the exact wording, but sometimes, you can change out the word gnarled with gnarly or weird or scary or whatever, right? There are a lot of words that you can switch out and find synonyms for that just help it feel a little bit different for you. You might also try bullet points instead of having a word for word retelling every time. You'll probably want a more precise punchline once you get to the exact spot for the surprise and that satisfying status lowering to happen. You'll have some wording that you want exactly, but in the meantime, you've set up this premise. Maybe play around in that premise for a little bit, say different words, try out different sentences, and then narrow it down to those precise wordings for the punchline. Pay attention while you're saying your lines to what your face is doing. Your facial expressions and also, but especially, your eyes. That can be the biggest betraying thing for a comedian. They might be saying the words and their vocal tone is just perfect. They got it. They nail in that part of the delivery. And they're smiling or they're making whatever facial expression they want to make, but their eyes look bored. Think about, what are my eyes doing? Am I smizing? Is there a light in my eyes? Do I seem interested, or do my eyes look bored? So pay attention to that sort of thing, and just wake up, pick it up, stay in the moment. Another way that you can sound unmemorized is if you segue from crowd work into material. This can be a little bit challenging, but it's also a very satisfying thing for the audience. It's satisfying because sometimes they won't notice when you've gone into material, and so they'll think this comedian is super brilliant, right? But sometimes they will notice. They'll notice that you have segued from crowd work into material, and that's okay too. They like that too. It's a cool thing that they have seen you do, that you can segue from one topic to another. That's really cool either way. So basically, your options if you do this are, it's either going to be cool or even cooler. And the final tip for sounding unmemorized is overact. Audiences are really good at noticing when things are a little off or a little memorized when we are just talking normally. And the reason is we have a lot of practice at hearing people talk normally. We have a lot of practice in that range of emotions that are just the everyday, the way that everybody is talking and acting kind of zone. We see it all the time. We know when things are a little off. But we don't see a lot of those big emotions. And so when you do those big emotions, we're not as good at being critical about it. It will feel more real to the audience. So go big, overact. It is possible to go so big that it's unbelievable, but that is often further than we think it is. A lot of times when we go big, the audience just goes like, wow, this person is really into what they're saying. And that's good. And even if it does read as a little bit too much, that's not that big of a deal, really. I mean, the audience knows it's theater, and they appreciate that you're going for it. So go for it. You might be asking yourself, how long should I wait before the audience starts laughing? And there are multiple answers to this question depending on a lot of different factors. So let's get into it. You can break down the various pauses after you tell a punchline and before the audience starts laughing into 3 general categories. There is a throwaway, there's a beat, and a pause. A throwaway is just a really short, like almost no pause. We're talking less than a half a second to no pause whatsoever. That area is a throwaway. And a throwaway delivery can be useful in times when the punchline is simple, and if you waited longer after telling that punchline, then it will give almost too much to do, too much anticipate, like too much. You're saying that this is, through that pause, that this is a big punchline, when it's not a big punchline. It's simple. And so giving it just the tiniest little throwaway delivery can make it feel like you're not putting that much weight into that thing that you just said, right? That's number 1. Number 2, if it is simple, and by simple, I kind of mean it doesn't have that much surprise. It's only a little surprising. But if you add that tiny little surprise in that punchline that you have to a throwaway, the effect that a throwaway has on the audience understanding is that it comes kind of midway through what you're saying. And so the audience has to catch it. They don't expect that there's going to be a punchline midway through what you're saying, or what feels like midway through what you're saying. And so that adds a little extra surprise. They go, oh, there was a joke there. I caught it. And the audience feels special for having caught it. And it adds just enough surprise that might make that joke get a laugh when it otherwise wouldn't have enough surprise to get a laugh. A throwaway line can be really useful in times when the punchline is a little underwhelming. And by underwhelming, I mean the status lowering is slight. It's a little nice. It's a little satisfying, but it's not very satisfying. And so if you have a punchline that is just a little bit satisfying and you give it a longer pause, then it implies that there's a lot of value there. Like, here it is. There it is. Isn't that great? Like, that's what a longer pause is kind of saying. And if it's not that satisfying, the audience will be like, well, it's not that good. Why are you giving it so much to do? But if you deliver it in a throwaway style, then you're not saying it like it's a big thing. It's just like, here's like a little bonus thing on the way to what I'm really saying. And so giving that tiny little pause can be the amount that it deserves, the way that the audience feels about it. There are also some risks to using a throwaway line style delivery, and those can be that sometimes the joke is too subtle for a throwaway line. If the joke is like subtle, then and you just speed past it, the audience might miss the joke altogether. Throwaway lines better for simple surprises, not subtle surprises, right? And sometimes the joke is too complex. The audience needs a little more time to get it. And so giving more time would be more useful than a throwaway delivery. And sometimes the punchline is just too good. It's too funny that, you give it this throwaway, the audience would be laughing for much longer, but you just have already started on the next thing. And so the audience doesn't have as much time to laugh like they would want to. The middle amount of time that you can give after you tell a punchline is called a beat. And a beat is roughly between a half second and 2/3 of a second. This is the most common amount of time that a comedian will give after they tell a punchline. And this gives the audience an amount of time to get it, but also it's not so much time that it gets awkward. If the audience isn't gonna laugh, the comedian can just move on in a kind of natural cadence. It's an amount of time that a person might give after they say a sentence in real life. And so it doesn't feel like, ideally, it doesn't feel like they paused specifically for the audience to laugh, right? There are some times when this is still too much of a pause and a throwaway line would have been more appropriate. And then there are times where this is not enough of a pause and more of a pause would have been appropriate. But this is that kind of right in the middle zone. And the final length of time is a pause. And this is anything after the 2/3 of a second to whenever, right? At a certain point, it becomes a pregnant pause, but, pause is just a longer amount of time. And a pause can be really useful in those times where the comedian wants to let the audience know that they should search for the joke that happened. Like something happened and the comedian pauses to give the audience a trigger to look for it. There was something funny there, and now it's your turn to find it and laugh. It can be really useful for the comedian to fully own the moment, what they just did. It can be an exhibition of confidence. There can be a lot of different reasons that a comedian might give a long pause after they have told the punchline. There are some risks for giving a long pause, though. One of the risks is that it can hold the audience in an awkward place. The audience might think, I get it. I don't need this long pause. You giving me this long pause is misreading what's happening right now. I just wasn't going to laugh. It's not that I need to look for the joke. It's, nothing like that. And it can be awkward to have a long pause. I want to give you a couple of notes about pauses in general. The taxonomy about whether it's a throwaway, a beat, or a pause is only so useful. What's more useful is thinking about the fundamentals of what the effects are of those. So whether you call something a beat or a pause, or whether you call it a throwaway line, that's not as important as what it's doing for the audience. Think about the social effects of these pauses. Another tip that I have for pauses is that it's a really good idea to socially justify your pauses. When a comedian tells a joke and then they pause and they just pause, they told a joke and then they just stop. They just wait. Then all that's saying to the audience is there was a joke there. And the comedian is putting this expectation on the audience to laugh. And that expectation causes tension for the audience. They go, the comedian wants me to laugh. Do I think this is funny? If I don't, awkward, right? So if you instead socially justify those pauses, then you're adding something that feels conversational, that feels real to the audience, so that it's not just that the comedian is waiting for the audience to laugh. So For instance, if I said a punchline and then I like took a breath, like let's say like I finished this punchline and I was like, all right, and then moved on to the next thing, then that justifies that pause because I had to take a breath. That was just a normal part of the conversation. It happened to be a pause, but it was because I was taking a breath, right? And sometimes you can say the punchline and then like sort of react to it too, and that justifies a pause. Like I was like, and then he was in the trash can. All right, like that's another thing. Me taking a moment to react to the thing also creates a pause for the audience to laugh if they're going to. But if they don't laugh, that pause it totally made sense for what I was saying anyway. So they don't feel like I had an expectation that I was placing on them that's making them feel awkward. You also might be asking yourself, how long should I pause after the audience starts laughing? Well, good question, you. I've got an answer for you. So when the audience starts laughing, generally, it's a good idea to wait until 70 to 80% of that laughter has diminished. If you jump in too early, then the audience will stop laughing because they want to hear what you say next. And so it can artificially shorten your laugh. But if you wait too long, if you wait for everybody to stop laughing, then in the tail end of that laughter stopping, it can kind of like diminish the momentum. And you could have ridden that momentum to the next funny thing that would help the next funny thing get a laugh. So 70 to 80% is generally a good time to wait. 70% or to 80% of the laughter has diminished, is gone, is over. Then move on to the next thing. And you keep that momentum really good. There are some times where it's useful to wait longer. Sometimes if you hold that emotion, and by the way, this too is also another situation where justify that pause. Even though the audience is laughing, what makes sense for you to do in that moment? If you told a punchline that involved an emotion, hold that emotion while the audience is laughing. And that can help elongate the laugh because you're holding them in that funny moment that they like. And sometimes when you're holding that emotion that they think is funny and is the reason that they're laughing or part of the reason that they're laughing, and you make a little change to it, a lifted eyebrow or a small gesture, it can add like an extra little pop of novelty that elongates the laughter even more. So stay in that moment, justify that moment socially, even though the audience is laughing too. There are some times where the comedian might want to let the laughter die out completely before moving on to the next thing. And sometimes it's because the comedian wants a reset of the room. They want to talk about something totally different. Or maybe the next thing that has really tightly to do with the last thing that they said, the next thing requires or is best with a lower mood, a lower kind of momentum. And so it makes sense to let the audience just get totally silent first. Be artistic with this. Same goes for stepping on the laughter. Sometimes it can be useful to convey urgency, or like what the comedian is about to say is more important than the laughter that they're getting. So it can feel like a power move in that sense. The audience goes like, wow, this comedian doesn't even need me to laugh a lot. They're just more interested in what they're talking about than that. That's so cool. This comedian is confident in what they're saying. So be artistic with your pauses. Be thoughtful about them. You've got that default, waiting for 70 to 80% of the laughter to die out, but sometimes getting away from that can be a really good choice.